Welcome to the 2019 MIPS Academy Festivas edition. We're going to cover a number of essential MIPS measures that you need to report in 2019, but we're doing it as a Festivas edition because there's an amazing football game that's coming on that we would be under a great deal of copyright problem if we named it that. So we're not. Instead, since I'm a Ravens fan, we're going to call it Festivas. So here we are for the Festivas edition, super exciting, and we're going to go ahead and walk through all of the different players that we have. And I'm going to start off with the 2019 VIPs. These are measures that are outcomes measures and are going to be worth 10 points. Gina, who are our 2019 VIPs?
First one will be measure 001, which would be diabetes, which would be hemoglobin A1C check.
All right, now what's interesting about this measure though is you don't want to perform well.
You don't, because it's an inverse measure.
And what does that mean?
It's opposite day. It means that you want to do low. You want 0.30, you want 1%, you don't want 100%.
Right, because the way the measure is set up is actually that there's poor performance on A1C, and you don't want a lot of patients that have A1Cs that are out of control. So diabetics, you need to have 2 encounters, so they're having a baseline A1C and then a follow-up A1C, and it's really looking at that outcome related to your diabetics. Now, what's the second measure?
Measure 0047, which would be our care plan.
Actually, no, we're going to go with 236. It's our outcomes measure. We have cue cards over here, and we're not completely, it's 330. We're not completely on it. But 236, and that is controlling high blood pressure. So tell me more about 236.
Same thing, it's double occurrence. You gotta have 2 visits, and you gotta have that baseline blood pressure.
Right. So now what's really interesting about those measures, though, is that I'm hypertensive, right? So they changed the measure now where anything over 120 becomes pre-hypertensive, and then you have the folks that are hypertensive, and since my blood pressure, usually during reporting period, is a little elevated at 131 over 80, I'm now a hypertensive patient. So definitely be sure to check out the 2019 specifications. So we have 2 measures, though, that are our key players. So let's go back to, what was the measure you just mentioned?
47, care plan.
All right, now care plan, when I think about a care plan, I'm thinking about a physical therapy care plan. It's what the physician and the therapist come up with. That's not what we're talking about here.
Now, what we're talking about here is basically, if the orders that if the patient goes unresponsive, what they want done, who they want to make their medical decisions, things like that.
Right, so that's really called an advance directive. So this would be end-of-life planning. What are the wishes of the patient? Now, it's a process measure, so it's just whether or not you've had the conversation and document it, generally in the electronic medical record or within the patient's chart. So pretty easy, straightforward measure, although that end-of-life planning might be a hard conversation depending on the practice. And then the last one that we have coming up, which had been one of our noble measures, which check out our website and learn more about those. But the noble measures before used to have measure 131 in it. I pulled that back for a bunch of reasons, really about the opioid epidemic. So tell me about measure 131.
So measure 131 is going to be pain assessment. And once again, you're going to have that, it's every visit, follow up, make sure that your patients are doing good. And, it's the whole, use a tool. Use the little frowny face and the smiley faces and whatever you need, whatever tool you use to document and watch over time and make sure that the pains are getting better.
And measure 131 is available to therapists, available to physicians, chiropractors, others. It's a very broad measure for E&M services or other encounters where there's physical manipulation. So those round out our top key players and our 2019 VIPs. So let's move into the Pro Bowl, because we do have a number of measures that in 2019 CMS has said, you know what, so many people do them, it's topped out. We've really topped out on performance and variation of care, so they're only going to be worth 7 points. Not up to 10, even with 100% performance, you'll only maximum be able to get 7 points. So I'm actually this time going to start off with our Hall of Famer, which is a little sad because this had been one of our noble measures. Measure 130, documentation on current medications. This was a very essential measure where all physicians and other clinicians are to document the current medications, new medications when they've gone off on for the patient. So Gina, tell me more about this. What's the frequency for that measure?
So documentation of current medication is every visit.
So like pain assessment, every encounter.
Every encounter.
So it's not just new patients, it's not just once a year, it is every E&M service.
Every service, yep.
So that was one of the problems that we did have with recording, but now because CMS has come back and said everybody's doing it, no variation of care, it's topped out at from 10 points to 7 points. And that does mean over time, in the next several years, we would anticipate that CMS is going to retire that measure. So let's move on and talk about our good friends in the surgery centers and our performing our surgeons. So there's two measures, measure 21 and 23, that we've reported for years, honestly, since I had been involved in reporting back in 2013. These two measures, very essential to the scope of what physicians do, but like I mentioned with the other measures, everybody's doing them. So Gina, what's measure 21?
So measure 21 is antibiotic.
Just remember this time. So this is going to be a question of, did you use a cephalosporin or did you use vancomycin or another non-cephalosporin perioperatively? And of course, we're doing this all the time now. Patients are not getting any surgeries without any type of antibiotic preventative. So it's really one of those prophylaxis aspects that we've just really moved into. And in the same way, prophylaxis for an embolism, VTE, measure 23, has become that same sort of industry standard. So tell me more about measure 23.
So measure 23 is VTE, and basically it's documenting that you're giving them some kind of prophylaxis, that you're putting the boots on them, or whatever it is to get those things going, get that blood moving, not let it settle,
Right, and you're not abandoning your patient. So those are those two measures that so many of our surgeons have reported. They're now only going to be worth 7 points in 2019. So let's move on to another set, and this was a big set that CMS in the 2018 proposed rule I talked about combining, and now we're looking at the fact that they're topped out, and that's measures 154 and 155. So what's the difference between those two measures?
So measure 154 is your screening measure. It's your fall screening, and has your patient fallen twice in the last year, or have they fallen one time and hurt themselves? And then we're going to follow it up with measure 155, which is the care plan of if they have fallen more than twice, or if they've fallen and hurt themselves, let's plan them some gait training or some physical therapy to help them strengthen up, whatever the care plan choice is.
Right, so a true care plan here related to falls. This is for patients that are 65 years of age and older, so you don't need to do it on your younger patients. And it still remains 2 measures, but remember the 2 measures are only worth 7 points each. So a total of 14 rather than 20. So something to keep in mind is you're looking to achieve, becoming an exceptional performer or something else in 2019. So let's move on to our next area, which I think is actually really big. As we mentioned with the opioid epidemic, there's a lot of measures, and SCG Health focuses on that area. We actually have 2 of our own measures. But there are 3 measures that, again, are topped out because the consistency on reporting has been there. And we've really had pain management being the folks that are doing the reporting on these. So tell me about 408, 412, and 414.
Okay, so there we have your 408 is your opioid risk assessment tool.
Yep, risk assessment.
You're going to have your contract.
Right, so your agreement to not overuse. And
yep, and then we're going to have opioid risk assessment, the tool.
And then over time, you're going to make sure.
Reduce.
So you're going to screen, right? So over time, we're going to screen and make sure that they're doing what they want. So you've got where you're doing the risk assessment, the risk of folks, whether or not they are at risk for becoming dependent or for selling. Then you have your next one, which is an agreement that I'm not going to sell and I'm going to work with you to not become addicted. And then the last one is either urine tox, you can do pill counts, a number of things, but different strategies to make sure that patients are actually taking the medication that they said they were. But as we mentioned, that variation of care has gone away, so now we're looking at this is only going to be worth 7 points each. So out of what could have been 30 points, you'll only be able to get 21. So the last area that we wanted to focus on is for our CRNAs, and it's really getting hard right now because our pro bowlers here, we've got 4 measures that round out the 5 that are left in the MIPS program, and these 4 measures are not showing variation of care, so more than likely in the next several years these are going to be completely eliminated from the program. So I'll start with the first 2. So 44 and 76 really are going to be one's for CABG and the other one is for inpatients where there's a cath. But 424 and 430, those have been the two measures that a lot of our CRNAs have been reporting. So tell me about those.
Okay, so measure 424 is your perioperative temp management. So that is a case that is more than 60 minutes, but is not a nerve block and is not a MAC. And it's whether or not, if it's over 60 minutes, within 30 minutes before or 15 minutes after anesthesia stop time, they, take a body temperature, and it's at, I think, 95.9 Fahrenheit.
Right, so it's really for instances of cases where you don't need to cool the patient, and instead you've got that nice warm fuzzy blanket that I know I really enjoyed. So that's that first one, but it's topped out, only worth 7 points. So the other one, I'm your typical case, a small woman, non-smoker. So I am at risk for
preventive post-op nausea and vomiting.
So we need to prevent my nausea and vomiting since I'm at risk for it. So there's a list of number of risks that are actually in the measure. Being a woman and non-smoker are some of them. There's others, so history of
motion sickness.
Right, and then a history of nausea and vomiting after surgery. So a number of things, so prevention of, so what needs to happen?
So typically they're going to give you 2 antiemetics at some point in time.
Right, and it's going to be perioperative or intraoperative, but really having a plan for those things. So the only note that I have about PONV is that it is only for inhalational anesthesia. It is not for the majority of cases that our CRNAs are doing. It's only inhalational cases. All right, so with that rounds out our pro bowlers and all of the measures that are likely going to be for retirement in the next several years. So let's turn to, as we're thinking about Festivas, let's turn to our rookies that we're looking at. So what are 2 new measures that you're looking at? Gina, I know we've got one that was an oldie and goodie, kind of like went off to arena ball over in Europe and now is coming back. So tell us about that measure.
That would be measure 182, functional assessment.
All right, so why is that something that's just come back?
Basically, because this is something that a lot of PTs, OTs do, and we're bringing them back in. We're going to bring functional assessment back in.
Right, so 182 was around in the first 2 years of MIPS. Chiropractors could report them. The problem became, though, that with all of these new PTs and OTs coming in and reporting it, CMS zeroed out the measure. So it is only going to be worth 3 points in the first year, but as we receive more information, CMS will reweight it. And it is possible that CMS will reweight it in 2019, but I'm not holding my breath. So what's the other rookie that I know I'm excited about?
That's going to be our shingles vaccine.
Now, what's interesting about measure 474?
It's a shingles vaccine.
Well,
that's interesting to me.
What's more interesting, though, is that it rounds out a number of preventive services that we have right now. And so we didn't mention them, but they are measures that are worth 10 points each. So you have flu vaccination, which is measure 110, measure 111, which is pneumococcal, and like pneumococcal, the new 474 shingles vaccination is just once in a lifetime. It's not meant to be every year like the flu vaccine, which is actually for 2 different flu seasons. So it's a really, again, measure 110, know that that's a funny measure. But along with those other measures, though, we've got a new measure, right? So we've partnered with the American College of Physicians and their QCDR, and we now have a measure for Tdap. So we'll now have 4 measures related to immunization for primary care physicians if they're interested in reporting those. So pretty exciting to round out, and again, new exciting rookies that are coming along. Some other preventive care measures that we do want to bring up, they're worth 10 as well, and so that's going to be breast cancer screening and colorectal screening, and that really rounds out the preventive care services. So anything else, Gina, that you want to bring up related to our Festivas or 2019 planning impromptu video?
Workbooks.
Oh, right. So we've got a number of new products that are coming out. So workbooks are coming out with the 2019 specifications. We actually have just finished up on the physical therapy one. So tell me more about the workbooks.
So the workbooks are really cool. Get in there, you get some good information, some background on it, some kind of, what you need to do to document, some examples of documentation, stuff like that. It's really a really good way to learn things and make sure that you're doing things right.
So we also included information on ICD-10 coding to enhance your HCC coding. We included other examples that are deep within the measure specification that might be interesting that you need to know about. So hopefully, again, there'll be something helpful as a new tool. We also will be having new courses that are going to be out on MIPS Academy in the coming days. And then our deadline for 2018 signups is what day, Gina?
February 14th, don't break my heart.
So So please don't break Gina's heart. Sign up already if you haven't for 2018 reporting, and we'll look forward to talking to you more in 2019 reporting. So this is the end of our Festivus session. And Gina, any final thoughts?
Don't forget to check out MIPS Academy.